Fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. It's fantastic to have you all here today. I want to welcome you to the second edition of EQ Monthly Firesides. Just to give you a little bit of context, EQ is a community that is focused on really empowering people from diverse backgrounds. And we've got a fantastic panel discussion today, which is really about post-pandemic leadership. So many of us are still in the midst of the pandemic, but many of us can also see the light at the other end of the tunnel. And how is that going to impact leadership? We've got, as I mentioned, some great panelists here, and the panelists have been all around the world, spent a lot of time on understanding the mechanics of each business industry that you could imagine. So we have Mohammed, who's been in the media industry, Rocki, who's in the recruitment and tech industry, and Dionne, who is also in the fintech industry. But I'm going to stop talking now, and without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to our wonderful moderator, Jennifer Francis, and she will start to guide your journey today for EQ's monthly event on leadership, leading post-pandemic. Jennifer, over to you. And you're on mute, Jennifer.
Apologies. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the second of our monthly fireside chats. It's really good to be here for the second month. And today we've got a really amazing lineup. We've got Rocki Howard, we've got Dionne Sawyerr, and we've got Mohammed Akhlaq. So the three of you, thank you for joining us. We confirm, Mohammed. And if you're ready to lean in, let's go. So I'd like you, each of you, to start by telling us in about 30 seconds, but you can obviously go over a little bit. Who are you? What do you do? And what have you got to say today in relation to the topic? Let's start with Dionne.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dionne Sawyerr. Thanks for the intro, Jen. I'm the Global People Director for World First. We're an international payments business. We move money around the world electronically. More recently, we were acquired by one of the biggest fintechs, Ant Financial, and they are part of the Alibaba group. I have been at World First for about 7 years. We were a startup when we joined, and now we're a part of a 110,000 person business. So the transformation has been immense over the last 2 years, coupled with the pandemic, has created a lot of complex challenges. And so my area around problem solving in the area of people is really what I've been homed in on, and what I'll share a bit more with you about today.
Thank you, Dionne. Rocki, over to you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. I'm Rocki Howard, and I have transitioned from a 30-year career in talent acquisition to be the Chief Diversity Officer at Smart Recruiters. Smart Recruiters is an HR tech company. We're leading the modern talent acquisition space. And during the day, I get the pleasure to be able to help our companies evolve their diversity hiring strategies. And I also get to make sure Smart Recruiters is a place built on inclusion and equity and belonging and social justice. I'm also the host of the Voices of Diversity podcast, and I identify as she, her, Black, Christian, Gen X, wife, and mom.
Wicked. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce Mohammed.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammed Akhlaq. I'm the CTO for a company known as ITN. ITN is a UK broadcaster or media provider. It provides news content for ITV, Channel 4 and Channel 5. I've worked around the world launching various TV channels and broadcast channels, 24-hour news channels, and providing an end-to-end solution from tech to fit out to recruitment to operations and to actually getting the channel to air, really. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity to share some of the experiences and had done bruises in the past, and hopefully not so many in the future.
Brilliant. Okay, so my first question is really, what's different now? Who wants to go first?
Where do we start? I can jump in a little bit around a couple of things that I've seen that are different. And so we talk about post-pandemic. I think that depending on where you are in the world, you're at different stages in relation to the pandemic. I know that some areas and locations are completely out and we're on lockdown, and some are a bit of both. What is different, and what we started to sort of implement around COVID, is how we onboard new hires and how we communicate through the business what it is that we're trying to achieve, what our value and our purpose is. And I think that how that's changed and how that's different is we don't have the luxury of face-to-face communication in most arenas. And so we've had to be really concise and factual and sharp about what it is we want to communicate, and kind of weed out the noise amongst that. Email is kind of dying a death in our organization. We have instant messengers which have been created and developed. And I think that when it comes to how we talk about our strategy and our culture and our purpose, we really have thought about how we let the employee voice be heard. So two-way communication. And these are things that we had been doing prior to the pandemic, but I think that were taken for granted. You can communicate face-to-face often and without much hassle. And I think that there's been a concerted effort around ensuring that we communicate in the right way. And I think that the less formal communication has been used. We've kind of banned PowerPoints in certain arenas. We've decided to make things less formal. How do we make decisions quickly? How do we communicate what it is we're trying to achieve? I definitely have seen a marked difference in that in terms of World First as a business. I'll open it to anyone else that might want to add before I go on to the
Well, I do think there's a great point to be made when you talk about how we engage our people. And so I think if you go back to 2020, it wasn't just about the pandemic. It was a shift in the pandemic and our how we looked at humanity with the amplification of Black Lives Matter and all the social justice issues. So I think when you bring that into the world of work and you look at the implications for those of us who are leaders and how it's changed the way we maybe interact and how we look at the employment life cycle, you need to think about the fact now that we've now proven that virtual work does work. And we were already moving in that direction. And so virtual work is now a reality that is not going to go away. And the implications to not only how we attract talent, where we attract talent from, but how we nurture that talent, Dionne, as you were saying, and how we develop it. I think the other thing that's really key is how we there's been a shift, I think, in terms of what we value as leaders and what our team members value. And so I think what 2020 has done is it's kind of, it's led to a personal and a professional reset for many people. And people are looking at their priorities. People are looking personally, professionally, at how they move forward. What was important to them in 2019 is not necessarily the same things that are important in 2021. And so those are two key areas where I think we've really seen a shift. There's been a shift. The third thing I would mention too is there's much more a shift around mental health and psychological safety, and that being a expectation that people are looking for. So in my head, it really does revolve around and all the implications of remote work, the shift in values and the focus on mental health?
I think for me, the whole pandemic is in my head, at least, it's in three phases. The first one was sheer panic. How do we sustain and keep our businesses running in a situation where actually majority of our workforce are asked to stay at home and it's unsafe for them to come at work or mingle? So in the broadcast industry specifically, and I think this probably goes also quite nicely to a lot of industries where it's labor intensive, how do you keep production of content and still maintain a degree of quality of output and service to your audiences? That was the first challenge. And in many ways, the pandemic was actually a catalyst. A lot of the systems that are currently employed were already in existence, but they weren't really adopted because producers, content providers were also reluctant about losing production values and production qualities. But they were forced down the route where they had no choice but to adopt some of these remote workings, Skype calls, video conferencing, for guests, doing shows whereby instead of having people within the studio, they had people geographically placed dialing in on a video conference call. So the formats were roughly the same, but the look and feel was obviously significantly different. But now the emphasis in tech part of things is how do we improve on the quality and give more versatility and hopefully give the creatives more opportunity to design shows around not only a live audience or live guests, but a hybrid solution whereby there's a combination, a mixture of the two. The second phase of the problem was, okay, what is sustainable and how do we nurture a workforce that can't really intermingle as they used to? And video conferencing, thankfully, has addressed a lot of those problems because, I don't know, about 5-6 years ago, video conferencing was still quite early days, and it was, I can't imagine a pandemic scenario where you're doing everything via phone calls and no visuals. So it's helped a lot. You can see people, you can try and read people's expressions and understand where they're coming from. The only problem I find with video conferencing is it's sterile and clinical. You don't get the human interaction that you would normally do with a face-to-face conversation. So those are areas that I think we still need to look at and see how we can develop those further and see how we can address some of those issues. And the other thing is, how do you make a team function as a team, feel as part of a team, feel as though they belong to a team when actually they're all over the country or not actually ever sitting together, having a cup of coffee, having a chat. It becomes a lot more difficult in that respect. And I think also from my perspective is people are more geared towards half-hour team calls or video conferencing calls, and your day seems to be filled with all these calls, but not much time to actually do much about it. Yeah. And somehow people have forgotten how to use a phone. You can take a 2-minute conversation on the phone, but instead of that, they'll make a video conference call that's blocked out for 15 minutes or half an hour. Stage 3 for me, looking forward, I think in many ways, this is coming. Industry was working towards people working remotely, giving options, people working part-time, coming into work half day, half time, and working from home at other times. I think that's probably the realistic model that we're going to aim for, especially within ITN, whereby people will be given the option to come to work for 2 or 3 days a week, and the rest of the time work from home on a sort of flexible basis, really. And I think that addresses a lot of historic issues when it comes to people's responsibilities at home, childcare, families, etc. And I think it's going to be a happy medium. It's going to be there's going to obviously be a few teething problems along the way, but none that I don't think are unsubstantial.
Okay, thank you very much. So one of the things that certainly I've been trying to work out, and I'm glad that this is a topic today, how can you empower or support your team? Who's going to go first on that one?
I think it's mostly about communication, giving people time to express how they feel. So I don't know about every other industry, but whatever I've worked, we also have one-to-ones on a monthly basis with a member of staff to understand where they're coming from, what the issues are, for also for you to feed back to them as how they perform, etc. I think those are becoming more and more important and should be more frequent, because you're not in an environment where you have face to face. So allowing people to express how they're feeling, and just being supportive. And most of the time people are not looking for answers, they're just looking for someone to listen. And I think it's having that emotional intelligence to understand when to just listen and not do anything necessarily about it, and when to actually offer advice or intervene and do something that will hopefully support that individual overcome the obstacle or the issue they're facing.
Yeah, and in terms of supporting and empowering people, I think it's really important that they're clear about what it is they need to achieve, in terms of business results, as well as supporting them, with their day-to-day mental health and all things outside of performance. But you can empower people by really giving them structure around what their outputs are. And as a leader, I think it's really important to provide clarity, provide purpose, and ensure that you've got the right people in the right roles and everyone is clear about how we make decisions and how we move forward, because it can be really time consuming to make a decision when you're not in a meeting room altogether, if that's how decisions are made. You might not be able to get in contact with the right people at the right time. So I think remote working can sometimes slow down that process if people are unsure around who is making decisions and how they're to be made. So that's how we work on empowering our teams, by providing that clarity, and being there to sort of break down barriers as and when needed. But it really is around ensuring everyone knows what role they play as part of the wider team. And as we move to hybrid teams, potentially where people are in the office and working at home, that will become even more challenging, because everybody being remote is easier than having half remote and half in the office. And so that's something we'll have to really work on it as we move forward to the new normal.
Regarding clear objectives, deliverables, timelines are absolutely key, because it's so easy to lose track of when something should have been done, and when a deliverable needs to be met. I think that's absolutely quite key, really.
I agree. And I agree with both the points that Mo and Dee have made. What I would say is I think we miss something. I think we don't often ask employees how we can help and support them. We assume that we actually know. And again, in this world where what worked for me a year ago may not be what works for me now, I think we need, as leaders, to actually ask people the question. And so at the end of every one-on-one I do, I'll ask, how can I help and support you? And then you have to be the kind of leader to facilitate the conversation that says, I can do that for you. This is what I can't do, and actually deliver and build trust over time. I think also when you talk about the empowerment piece, Dee's absolutely right. It's about setting expectations, but then I think it's about us shifting our mindset about the delivery of those expectations. We've got women leaving the workforce in droves, and were adversely impacted by COVID because historically women are also responsible for caretaking within their homes. And so what I would encourage leaders to really do when you're thinking about supporting and empowering someone, if, for example, I have someone working for me that's an accountant, and I know I need the P&Ls at at 9 a.m. on the 5th of the month, I don't really give a crap whether the accountant does it between 9 and 5 or 5 and 9, as long as I have the P&Ls at 9 a.m. on the 1st. And so I think we really need to think about breaking the structure of how people worked before and saying to our people, how can I turn this around so that it puts you in a place where you're delivering your best? I think there's one other thing I'd like to mention. We often focus on, when we're giving people those clear directions and deliverables, there also needs to be a constant, authentic, and honest conversation with feedback that's involved. But when that feedback is given, it needs to be real, it needs to be timely. But we also tend to focus a lot on where people need the constructive criticism, which is absolutely key. What we don't focus enough on is, as leaders, learning where people's true strengths are and their value adds are, and working people and putting them in situations and giving them work and exposing them to projects and opportunities where they really get to lean into their strengths instead of being in a place where they're constantly trying to overcome a weakness. So I think when we think about support and empowerment, it's a combination of all the things that we've spoken about.
I think, Rocki, you mentioned something about sort of, mental health. And I think that's one area that I never really considered would actually affect people working from home. And I suppose in short bursts, it shouldn't, and it often doesn't. But when you're there for a long duration of time, from my own experience, I actually was affected by, which surprised me. And I think it's really difficult to sometimes give constructive feedback or any sort of feedback, or give someone deadlines when you don't really fully understand the circumstances that they're actually under, and it's really hard to put you in that place. The question also is that at what point do you draw a line? Because you can't engross on other people's personal lives as well. It's a business relationship. And you want to make sure that those boundaries somehow are maintained, but also in maintaining a caring, supportive way, but also being able to meet your business objectives. And trying to find that balance is a really tough ask.
The balance is really tough, and it is one of those things that I think it makes the difference between managers and leaders, right? Managers are always thinking about, here's the deliverables I've been done, so I'm going to delegate those down, and they're going to be done come hell or high water on the first. Leaders will come back and say, well, we just had the George Floyd verdict come in, and my African American team members are distraught and distracted and focused. And so, do we really need this newsletter out today, or is there any significant business impact as to whether we do it 3 days from now? I think the workforce of the future is going to be, we're going to need a little bit more thought. And this is a big thing, because we've always delivered things in the way that we've done it, when we've done it. As leaders, we don't often come back and question, well, why does that have to be on the 3rd? Why can't it be on the 5th? Why does this? Is this the right goal? Is this the right deadline? If I can deliver it in this way, what's the outcome we're trying to get to? And how does this impact the business if I do or don't? Leaders will do that. And I think, Mohammed, that's where there's a collaborative approach. And I think when you're building trust and respect with the people who are working for you, they will help you with that too. And they will go over and beyond if they know that you're authentically caring for their mental health. And there may be times when we have to say to people, you know what? You're not in a good place right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust around you. Like, I'm going to need to pull you out of this, set you aside. Let's care and tender for you. Let's make sure you're okay. And I'm going to have to replace and bring someone. So this is a big shift and challenge in terms of how we lead, because the management piece, I think so many people lean on managing, whereas we come into the future, we're really going to have to lean more on leading. And you're right, it's complex, right? There's no easy answer.
On that point, I just remembered that's when Barack Obama, his inauguration, I worked for a very, very British organization, but an arts organization, an interesting one. And you know, on the day of his inauguration, my president decided to put a TV screen upstairs in a public place for anyone who wanted to go and see this on TV. And we are talking about back then. And it was, in my mind, even as a communicator, it's like, but actually just talking about what is leadership and understanding the different, how to embrace and how to pastor the staff and the large staffs that are sometimes who you're leading in these organizations. I would like to come back to mental health shortly, because it is something that's new, and it's something that's not, well, let's go there now, actually, because it's something that's really in the workplace. I've never really heard it discussed. I mean, people generally take time off work when they're not well, and that's it. But actually, that we're all talking about mental well-being in general, mental health. Let's just talk some more about, well, what are the signs? What can a leader do? That two of you are sort of, in charge of managing and bringing in big groups of people. Just interested to understand some leadership skills and ways of working in this area, which is certainly new for me.
I think the definition of mental health has changed over time, and it's evolved. And you're right, there used to be all types of stigmas that came with mental health. And we used to see it as, oh my gosh, this person has had a breakdown, we need to take them out of the business. But that's not what mental health and psychological safety look like today. And I think that one is an offshoot of the other. So when you think about mental health, this can present itself in multiple ways and iterations. And I'll be the first one to raise my hand. I struggle with anxiety. I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder 20 years ago, right? And so, if someone looks at me, they would not think that I have any type of mental health challenges. And some may argue, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal, right? But yet and still it may manifest itself in different ways. And so I think I'm not sure any of us are going to become mental health professionals or experts, but it's about creating a culture where someone who is struggling with now the multiple nuances of mental health disorders can say, oh, you know what? I'm challenged in this way. So I'll give you a good example. I have high anxiety. And so, maybe being on Skype and being on video hour after hour after hour, day after day after day, maybe that makes my anxiety rise. And I need to be able to say to my boss, you know what, this is an easy accommodation that you could make for me if one day of the week I could have a no video day. I'll still be on, I'll still talk to people. I mean, a year ago we weren't on these constant videos, but like this makes me nervous. I've got to be in front of people. I've got to make sure like my kid isn't barking in the background or whatever the case may be. And so I think it's a different type. I also think people are dealing with anxiety, depression, being alone, all types of challenges. And I think it's about, again, creating a space where someone can say, I'm struggling, and we as leaders are not dismissive and we're supportive. And for those of us who have organizations who can actually create programs that we can refer people to. So I know our organization does have a mental health benefit. So if I see someone who is struggling with something, it's easy for me to say, have you tried Spill? Like, have you taken the time, talk to a therapist, which is another stigma. And I think this is where diversity comes in, because depending on your community, like Black and brown folks don't like to talk about therapy. I think that that's the best money I spend is with my therapist, right? I have no stigmas about saying I will call a shrink in a minute. And that type of transparency allows others to go, ooh, this is a safe space for me. So not all mental health needs to be addressed, or do we need to write a prescription, or do we need to take somebody out or whatever, but we need to give people the space to operate in and know that they've built a culture where they can talk about it and be safe, and maybe ask for a reasonable accommodation that will make them much more productive, put them in a place where they can meet their goals and objectives while feeling good about themselves.
I think the label mental health is it's a wide breadth that can accommodate an awful lot of clinical illnesses to to the very light sort of, I've had a really bad day, or I stubbed my toe on the wall, and it's really, you know, peeved me off type thing, really. I think the really useful thing, one of the benefits coming out of the pandemic is people are aware of how they feel, not necessarily mental health in a destructive, but how they actually feel they've had a bad day. And I think part of the problem is when lockdown in the UK, for example, was first introduced, the ability to go out to see a friend, or to go to a shop, or to go to a coffee place, when that was taken away from you, you missed it and you craved it. And that caused additional stress, anxiety, and pressure. The reality is that the coffee shop down the road was there all the time. You visit it once a year, if that. But for some reason, it just started playing on it. And I think that's part of it, is that we are human beings. We are pack animals. We need interaction with other human beings. And I think for our own well-being, mental health-wise, that is an important element of it. And that's why I think in the future, the hybrid model, though it presents itself with an awful lot of challenges, is probably the right way forward, because you still have that opportunity to interact with your team members, to build the team, feel part of the team. But then you've also got the option of being able to work from home as well, or remotely.
Yeah, during the pandemic, the height of it in the UK, we again asked about feedback from our employees around would they like to voluntarily come into the office to have some interaction, socially distanced, safe space, and the majority said yes. And so I think it's really about being aware of what it is that your teams need in terms of support, and not being afraid to talk about it. Again, when we had all the schools closed, I think that occasion was very challenging for parents or caregivers. And so we launched lots of initiatives and communications around ensuring that people felt supported, and that we knew we're all human, no one is immune to this pandemic. You need to take time away from what you're doing, you need to be your best. And so we encouraged that. We kind of said, don't do back-to-back video conferences all day, sort out your children, work out what you need to do. We made allowances, we were flexible, we were adaptable. I think these are some of the things that just thrown up how we need to lead more generally, but around mental health, it's about understanding that, you know, someone might feel great one day and feel really bad the next day, and giving them that safe space to talk to you, and know that you will be there to support them, I think is what we've tried to do as a business.
Which leads on to, I'd like to discuss now team culture pre and post-pandemic.
I'll start with that one. I think that culture is something that really organically started to happen to us whilst we were in the midst of the pandemic. There was a lot of chaos, as Mohammed mentioned. There was a lot of problems to solve. There was a lot of fixing in the beginning. And then it was like, okay, we think we've got things under control now. Our customers are happy, they understand what we're doing now. Now let's look at what we're doing internally. But that's one area that I think we need to be more deliberate about in terms of culture. And when I say that, I mean, how do we do things as a business? How do we make decisions? What systems do we have in place to make those decisions? I think the entrepreneurial kind of spirit and culture that we try to drive within our business, that's all really positive and good and well. But when you have potentially 6 decision makers in a process, you don't lend those systems to that culture. So that was an area that, that is a high priority around how we communicate to people that are onboarding remotely. and those that have been with us for a long time that we haven't been able to see, how do we embed on of the culture that we want to see moving forward? And that's something that we're working through for sure. I think it all starts with the systems that you've got in place and the processes, and then, you know, the what underpins the company values and how we do things. Why do we do these things for our customers? What is it that, you know, we want to achieve? What are our customers looking for, and how does that flow all the way back down to how we make decisions as a business? One thing that we did, which it was more to keep morale up. I think that we were kind of keeping our head above water, keeping morale up, rather than focusing on the deep-rooted issues of the culture. We would send care packages out to employees, encouraging them, sending them gifts on special occasions, milestones we would mark. But we really need to dig deeper around, okay, coming out of the pandemic now, where we may be automating certain processes, and we want people to think about value add decision making. How do we embed that? And that's something that we're focusing on now, actually, as a business. Yeah.
Thank you. Rocki, Mohammed?
I think, look, I started this role in the middle of the pandemic.
Okay.
So I completely hear what you're saying about how you onboard someone. So from someone who's been onboarded during this pandemic, I can tell you now, it is extremely challenging. I didn't think it was going to be as difficult as it turned out to be. And what I mean by that is I'm very used to meeting your team members, bonding with your team members. You understand how they work and how they think. They get to know your management style, and it's through interaction and face-to-face. When that's taken away from you and you are doing everything via video conferencing, it's really tough to get to understand someone's motives, their aspirations, their drive, their effectiveness even sometimes. And when it comes to the culture of an organization, it's even harder because you're not there. And it's not impossible to achieve. It is achievable. I've done it. It just takes a lot longer. Therefore, you have to be a bit more resilient, a bit more patient with yourself, and stop, sort of questioning yourself, why have I not been able to get to this level by now? I should have been there, because you're not measuring yourself against normal times. You're measuring yourself in an abnormal situation.
I think I'd like to take the cultural question from the world I live in, which is the diversity world. And I think the challenge that organizations are facing right now is we've seen lots of organizations make pledges and promises around diversity. We've seen lots of donations given. We've seen lots of marketing change around 2020. But where the gap seems to be is translating that back into a culture that can sustain growth. There's lots of companies right now that are focused on hiring diverse talent, but what they're not focused on is building cultures where when that diversity lands in the organization, there is a sense of equity and inclusion and belonging that is becoming embedded within that cultural fabric, within the DNA of who that company is and how people actually behave. And from my point of view, that's because there's a core lack of accountability, organizational accountability from the C-suite on down. There's a lack of education of people understanding what their role in building that type of culture is. And so when I look at culture and the challenges as we go forward, trust and believe, people are going to hold us accountable to those public commitments we've made. We won't be able to do it unless we really start to change the culture. And increasing representation is a very small part of that. And I don't mean that representation is not important to me. That's key. But what I mean is it's a small part, because if I bring people that are diverse in, but I don't have a culture that's willing to accept and willing to allow them to flourish and feel like they belong, if I'm not paying them equitably, if I'm not treating them equitably, this actually, in my opinion, does more harm than good. So from a cultural perspective, I think of it right now, and I'm deeply entrenched in thinking about it from a diversity perspective, and not a diversity, but a DEIB perspective.
I think the thing, cultural change in any organization, in any society, takes a very, very long time. It's not something that happens in a year or two. It's probably decades, if not generations. But I think the start that we've now started with all these events, some of them quite tragic in recent times, have actually set a pace of change. So there's almost a sense that something is happening, though it may be small. We just need to maintain that momentum, and over time, hopefully build upon it. And you can only change an organization's culture from within. So we just need more people of color, of different backgrounds, in organizations to start to influence that change and influence the outlook of that organization to be more inclusive. It's just time. It's just time.
So on that note, let's talk about self-leadership and team leadership.
Well, self-leadership, I think, is probably the key to team leadership, right? I think you have to know who you are as a leader, and I think you have to manage yourself to be able to effectively manage a team. And I think there is, I do believe that the number one absolutely critical leadership competency, if you will, it's not quite the word I'm looking for, but I'm at a blank, is humility. And I certainly think that 2020 probably created a bit of humility in those of us who may have had it before or may not have had it. And I think for me, the biggest challenge as a leader in self-management, and I'll just talk about the one thing that I struggle with personally to share that, is I am a bit of a workaholic. And I don't necessarily work in a balanced way. I don't always tend to my own mental health. I am prone to burnout, and people will do what you do, not what you tell them to do. I don't expect anyone else to do that. And so I think when I think about the correlation between how I manage myself and how I show up as a leader and how I lead my team, I have become acutely aware, and you would have thought I would have learned this from raising 4 children, that they do what I do, they don't do what I say. And so how I carry myself, how I align to my personal values, how I align to our corporate values, how I demonstrate those, is not only important for me in my leadership journey, but it's critical to how I lead my team.
I think it's really, look, early on, I was always told, lead by example. You can't ask someone else to do something that you're not prepared to do yourself. And I think also it's about being able to delegate responsibility and let someone take it and run with it, and be able to have that confidence to do that. Many mistakes that leaders make from what I've seen is that when they micromanage, and often it's because they lack confidence in their own abilities. So you are part of a team. You may be a leader or a manager, but you're still part of a team, and you need to work as a team. And no one can do everything. So for me, it's all about lead by example. You're part of the team, just as important as anyone else, and no less than anyone else. And sharing and setting the same visual for everyone.
Yeah, and in terms of team leadership, I think Rocki mentioned it earlier around honing in on people's strengths where you can, because it's not always possible to concentrate on everyone's strengths at the same time when they're are objectives that you need to meet. So, you know, we have to be realistic around what that looks like for people, but it's about those conversations that you have with those individuals and you identifying their strengths and helping them realize them and sort of thrusting them into positions that they may not have expected to be in, giving them opportunities, leading by example, as Mohammed mentioned. I think if you can position your team with really clear responsibilities and everyone has a role to play, then the team will feel like it's being led in the right direction. And one of the most important teams I think I've realized that needs to be as strong as it can be is the leadership team. And so we've done a lot of work in the team that is cross-functional. So I think you find sometimes that where you're a functional expert, you may spend a lot of your time leading that team when you're part of a wider leadership team. And now I think it's even more critical than it's been before that cohesive leadership team that manages all of the functions in the business is able to work together and has input to give around other functions, areas, and add value to decision making and how we move the business forward. Because I think you do find a lot in businesses that can sometimes be one of the weaker links. And if we start there at the top and we ensure that team operates as a team, then I think they can model that down. And that's what an area that we've been really focusing on.
I think the other part of a leader is to ensure that they nurture talent and help people achieve their full potential. One of the most satisfying things I ever get out of management is when I see someone start at a certain level, help them develop to a higher level, actually go on and do bigger and better things than I've done. It's so rewarding to see that potential, nurture that potential, and let that person fly and reach their true potential, really. And it's not about me, it's about us.
It's about them. I so wholeheartedly agree. That is my joy. I think the gap, though, as leaders in our own competencies is our ability to be able to prioritize the nurturing of those teams. It's our ability to be able to recognize strengths in other people and to be able to nurture those, because unfortunately people don't always know their own strengths, and we're in almost a position of responsibility to be able to identify those and to develop those, as well as giving the feedback. And I think sometimes we are so focused on, I've got to drive, I've got to deliver this is what I've got to deliver, that all of that work that it takes that would actually make it easier for your team to deliver, we don't actually nurture those pieces and parts. And I think that's one of the things we need to look at when we look at our own skills.
I think one of the problems is that we have leaders in positions of leadership that actually don't have the right skill set. That's a big problem.
I could spend 3 hours talking about that by itself.
It's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just being able to accept, and no one's perfect. Everyone has gaps in experience and knowledge. And I think it's to recognize it, accept it, own it, and then do something about it. Or if you can't do something about it because we are who we are, have someone within your team that can actually counter your incentives that are going, and then they can balance you out again. And it's being able to recognize those within yourself and being able to have the courage to do it. And I think,
and the humility too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people tend to hide away. They think they need to be perfect and can't make mistakes. If you don't make a mistake, you don't learn.
All valid points, which I know we could spend a long time talking about, because I've got experiences I'd love to bring to the table. I'm going to take one of the questions from the floor, which is, how would you suggest realigning KPIs for roles within the company to encompass the DEI objectives?
Well, I made a note in this in the chat, and so let me say it out loud. First of all, I think if it's important, it should be measured, and what doesn't get measured doesn't matter. So I do think having, KPIs around diversity is absolutely critical if your organization is focused on that. And I'm using that word broadly because I don't think, again, I think a lot of companies are looking at goals around diversity, but they don't move to the equity, inclusion, and belonging pieces, which is where the gap is. And so I get asked this question almost every time I appear in front of audience, like, what is the right metric? What should we be measuring? And certainly I could share some very specifics, but I think here's the problem. What I would encourage you all to do is to look at your strategy within your organization and the specific goals that you're looking to achieve. And then start to say, okay, if I'm looking to ensure that we have pay equity by 2025 across all of our functions, then where are the different people that need to contribute to that, and what do they need to do? Right? So if I'm talking about pay equity, I've got HR, I've got HRBPs involved, I've got finance involved, I've got managers involved, I've got functional people involved to help me understand what these different levels are and why I've got 18 levels of, a help desk person. It is not something that you can just wiggle your finger and make it appear. And so I think what we need to do, because lots of organizations will go, oh, so-and-so is measuring this, so I'm going to measure this. And when you ask them, how does that align to your goals and objectives, and how is it helping you to achieve? They go, I don't know, right? So I think you really have to look at where are you on the DEIB journey as an organization? Where are you trying to move to on the journey? What actions are going to help you get there? And how do they need to be supported in the organization? And as you answer those questions, develop your key performance indicators based on the answers to those questions.
I think KPIs it depends what you mean by KPI and what level. Are you talking corporate, divisional, departmental, team? Are you talking personal? They all have different sort of different strengths and indicators. And I think due to the pandemic, I think there are some corporate, there's some industries that actually will suffer to achieve those KPIs because of the situation we're in. There are other industries that actually doesn't have that much of an impact on the KPIs when it comes to business performance, departmental or divisional performance. There are others that have actually exceeded probably those elements, but they've got to be measurable. And I think the key for those that they've got to be focused. They've got to mean something, and you have to be able to measure them to actually for that information to be useful. Yeah, it just around those sort of elements really. People use KPIs all the time, and sometimes they mean absolutely nothing.
Dionne, do you want to wade in, or do you feel it's all bad?
I'll just slightly mention data rather than sort of KPIs around how we look at diversity within our organisation. And it is really important that we get diverse backgrounds into the business, but ensuring we can retain them is even harder. And do we have the systems in place to ensure that we can do that? And so, as an example, some of our leaders, we've encouraged, well, actually, some of them have suggested that they want to see diversity in shortlists before we even move forward into things like recruitment, as an example. And so there's lots of different areas that you can look at how we bring diverse talent into the business and then how we retain them. But some of it also is around, well, what is the data telling us about who we've been promoting all these years? Where does it drop off? What managers do we have in the business that are clones of each other? Where do we need to diversify? Are there certain segments within the business that have diversity over others? Are they the lower paid roles, as an example? Are there the more senior roles? And we've been cutting data in a different way in order to work out where the KPIs need to be. So we won't sort of roll out blanket deliverables or KPIs for leaders, but we will do it in pockets of the business where we want to make an impact, because we have to start small to start to see some of the changes, and that's how we're approaching it.
The danger is it becomes a numbers game.
It can,
and that is very, very, I think, dangerous, because it's misleading. Because you get all these reports, this organization, that organization, the diversity, inclusion, all those sort of figures, but sometimes they actually mean nothing. It doesn't actually, they're not in positions of influence or power or control. They're not actually influencing the cultural change of the organization. It's just making sure that the boxes have been ticked and that organization have met that particular criteria for that year. And I think that's the danger, that they need to be real motive and understanding why they're doing it, and getting the right talent, not just filling a gap.
Yes, I 100% agree. But we have to start somewhere as well. So
but you got to start with why.
Yeah. So the time's raced by as usual, but just before we go, really 30 seconds each one of you. What is the main 1 or 2 tips you want to leave with our EQ community? Well, you want to leave our E community with?
For me, I'm an internal optimist. So be positive. There's a silver lining in that cloud. The light is at the end of the tunnel. We're coming out of this. Be positive, be focused, and be confident. And it's going to get better. Believe in it, and it will.
I will leave you guys with think global, act local. I think that where we're working in global roles or global context, what we're trying to achieve as businesses on a global scale makes sense. But in order to achieve that, we have to think locally. And an example of that is in China, our colleagues there have gone back to work 5 days a week, full time. In the West, that isn't what we're going to do. And there are reasons around that. There's reasons around face-to-face interaction and the culture and reading body language and communicating to create innovations and being face-to-face in the East. And then we're leaning towards other priorities and objectives in the West. So I would say that's something that I want to leave our audience with, whether you're leaders or part of a team, to think of a global context, but do what works for you locally.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Think global.
Think global, act local.
I'm going to use that. That's a good one.
So we got such great panelists. Rocki, over to you.
So I think number 1 is lean into your strengths to lead and cultivate the strengths of your people. And I believe that the successful leaders of the future will demonstrate grit and resiliency, flexibility, and focus. So I think that's how we're not only going to survive, but how we're going to thrive.
So I just want to thank you all. You've been amazing. You've been the perfect panel. I didn't have to say much. You just took it away. So we appreciated you, your insight, your expertise. And to everyone out there, just saying, looking forward to seeing you next month. And thank you for being here this evening.